The reason why we've decided to focus on this is because we did some research with some of the users of CoverageBook, and we started to see really interesting reports coming out of the tool from our charity customers and PR teams who are working with non-profits. They looked very different to the other coverage reports that our other customers were creating. And so we wanted to know a little bit more about that. And so what we were realizing and finding out was completely different audience, report reader audience, that these reports were being sent out to. It really was varying way beyond PR and marketing directors. And it was these reports are gaining the attention of some pretty important organizations, such as trying to generate more volunteers, partners. And yeah, it was just some really cool ways of reporting that we wanted to just share out more. But then we also wanted to add a little bit more, which is why I'm joined by Kristian Foged. He is an amazing data analyst and measurement expert. I've worked with Kristian on the PRCA Innovation Group, and he has all sorts of accolades, actually, don't you? You were in the PR Week's 30 Under 30 a couple of years ago. But he was also named in the Provoke Media's top 25 innovators last year as well. And he's also the founder of Simply Thought, which is a strategy consultancy which really helps with measurement and going from sort of the PR data right through to human insight and joining it all together. So I wanted to get Kristian's help on this one, because it's one thing reporting on PR coverage for charities and non-profits, but proving that journey is where we all might need a little bit of help, and that is where he's going to help us with. So thank you for joining us, Kristian.
Happy to be here.
Great. As always, ask questions. You already know how to use the chat, so thank you for getting involved with that, and also get involved on Twitter. So wanted to sort of go into what the common goals and objectives are, because that's the sort of first part of measurement, really. And before we even get to the exact sort of goals, this might be really obvious to a lot of you in the audience who actually work in this space. But again, for us, when we were doing this sort of research into this new, well, not new, but this big sort of user area for CoverageBook, we're really starting to see different trends within different areas. And it's not just charities. Like some of these different organizations, the one that we're actually going to be using as a case study later on was a community interest company. And obviously then there's social enterprises, non-profits, different types of organizations all doing good. The reason why it's important to talk about the differences is because they do have slightly different objectives in how, in PR's role and the job for PR to be done to try and reach some of these goals. And so first off, it was just interesting to really think about what these different areas are, and then who those different stakeholders would be with some of these different organizations, and then the goals around them. This was really coming out when we were finding out who the report readers were for some of the reports that we were looking at. And yeah, really interesting to see that CoverageBook reports and other PR reports were being sent to funders as a way of measuring how well the funding did, but also to try and gain more. So really an important role for the PR report in whether this organization was going to be growing or helping more people in the future. So yeah, that was a bit of an eye-opener, really, and to think, okay, how do we speak to these different stakeholders who A, might not be familiar with PR metrics, but B, might not need that as the first thing that they see. They might need another story being told to them. So yeah, really interesting just to really think about your stakeholders. Who are your report readers? How do you need to flex your reports to be able to really grab their attention and tell your success story? But the common goals that we were finding was that eventually, obviously, we know that PR raises awareness. that goes without saying. That's one of the, but that's not an ultimate end goal for PR. It's like, why do we need to raise awareness? What does that awareness then do? And we were finding that the increased awareness for some of these organizations was then to gain new funding, gain the attention of new funders, get in front of new potential partners that you could make partnerships with and get some work with brands potentially. For some people, we were finding out that it was really important to increase their volunteers. And so again, that was an important job for PR. But the biggest one was around donations, especially for charities. And I know that the way that charities and community interest companies and other non-profits are funded in different ways. So yeah, that was two sort of important areas. Thinking about whether people are in-house working with non-profits and charities. In fact, it would be really interesting just to hear if you could put into the chat whether you are in-house at a charity or a non-profit, or work for an agency with charities and non-profits. It's quite good just to get a gauge of where people are at. But we did sort of split our research between two, and we did speak to all sorts of people. But this one with Way Forward, this is actually an organisation which helps charities and it helps community interest groups with funding and how to gain funding. And they've said here that reporting is so important. So if we're not reporting on the impact that charities, non-profits are having, then you may as well expect to just stop that work. So it's important to invest in it, to build enough time in it, and to do it properly. So when we're starting to see this kind of thing, it's just like, we really need to share as much information as we can here. Great to sort of see some of this agencies and a real mix there in the chat. So this was a quote from Claire Granger. Not sure if she's on today, but Claire works for Granger PR, and hi Dan from Dad LaSalle. I need to stop looking at the chat now and get on with it. So Claire Granger works for an agency, her own agency, and she works with a number of charities. And she actually was challenged recently to show some of the wider impact of PR. So really super happy with the amazing work that she was doing and getting the great PR coverage especially in press in Scotland. And that I know that some of her charity clients were being asked to prove more of how successful marketing has been with the charity and growth. So she's looking into that at the moment around like how she improved the PR coverage led to traffic to a website and then donations. And we're going to be looking at that a little bit later. But this is the point being is really important for whether you're working with in an agency, to be able to talk to the stakeholders that your client will be working with, but also just helping your client as much as possible, whether they're in the PR or if they're part of a small charity or organization, just to try and help them as much as possible with these metrics. Next one is Dan, who I just saw is in the chat and is live. Hi Dan, thank you so much for your help with this. So yeah, Dan is really very different to Claire. So Dan is part of that, runs and founder of Dad LaSalle, which is an amazing community interest company. We're going to share his details at the end, but you're going to learn a lot more about their organisation throughout this, because we've used some of their work as an example to show some of the reports. But yeah, Dan was just saying how important it is for him to use his PR report, but he's called it a PR report, he's calling it a social impact report. However, it started with PR coverage and adding in lots more content, all to be aimed at trying to gain funders. So he's putting that adding lots more to the report, all to gain the attention of funders, new volunteers and partners. And you're going to see a little bit more about that later. So here it is, a social impact report from Dan at Dad LaSalle. So as I mentioned, he does have PR coverage, But it's not just that. He goes through the whole breadth of activity that Dad Lassalle has all through and separates it into different sections. And essentially what they do is they are a network which join up around over 2,000 dads across the world, all with the aim to make them feel more connected and trying to drive down loneliness. There's a really big problem, not just in the UK, across the world, but with male suicide going up, and dads particularly feel quite isolated at times. And so this organisation is really helping connect dads through a whole multitude of different ways. Started with events, now goes through to sort of online communities, and then they're using technology as well to make these connections. So loads of different activity, but Dan was getting some really great coverage and also some lots of events and an amazing attendance at events, but then was surveying the people who are attending the events and the people who he was connecting through Dad Lassalle, through the community interest company, and getting some really great stats here. So you can see these are some screen grabs from his social impact report, and he's just getting some really amazing, great reception from the people this is going to, and he's really starting to gain the attention of new funders, new partners are coming off the back of this, and interest in new volunteers as well. So this is something that he just keeps building on. I will drop the link to the live report so you can have a look through at your leisure into the chat shortly. And as I said, we will share his details too, because it's really working for him. So he's using CoverageBook as the base, but he is actually customizing it a lot. So this actually looks very different to a normal PR report that is generated from CoverageBook for somebody in another sector. That's because Dan is adding a lot of metrics. So this is what we call custom metrics. So I mentioned that he surveys the people within his network to understand whether they are feeling better, like to see how successful the work that Dad Lassalle is doing. And he's got that alongside some of the metrics that are more automated from our side on the PR, from the PR activity. And he's using those, and they're displayed really well up top just to really grab the attention of the report readers. And he's also uploading his additional content to really get through the personal stories of the people that the organisation is helping, but also the stats that they and the reasons why they started in the first place. So again, really sort of narrating that story throughout the report. Maybe this is a great lesson just for normal PR reports anyway. Sometimes we lose that element in PR reports of really explaining, getting back to the basics of why, what's the objective. We're not just raising awareness. Why are we raising awareness? And I think that it's a great lesson there of like how to use these sort of custom slides and uploads, such as that really important image there about male suicide. Yeah, he's done that really, really well. He also was using, sounds very boring, sections, but really important when you've got lots of different activity. Again, a good lesson even outside of charity and non-profit in any sector, where we have so many different parts to earned media now, where we have events, we've got different types of PR coverage. But again, sort of he uses these different sections really well to tell the story and to organize all of the different things that the organization does. And it's really, once you see it, it's really impactful once you start to see how much they're doing. Great story for funders to show how wide and how well utilized the funding is that they're getting. He's also started to generate, so with these different sections, I mentioned that there's different readers of this report, so he's sending it to different potential partners, also funders, to tell the story of how the fund's been using. And you can generate sort of a unique URL to the different sections, which just gets people there quicker. So this is all like quite useful tips if you are a CoverageBook user, we can, if you want more detail on this, if you are a CoverageBook user, just let us know, and then I can send you, direct you to a blog post that goes into a bit more detail about that. And if you're not, then you can always test out the free trial if you want to. But if not, it's a good way, or you could use another tool and separate in this way, because I'm not sure how you do a direct link, but it's really important just to try and get those readers to the most important part and most relevant part of a report for them. So that's great with having a look at how PR can sit side by side the results of other activity from a charity or from a non-profit, and whether it's an event or other activity that they're doing. And then we also did see some stats of the sort of further impact. But I'm going to pass over now to Kristian, because how can we link all of these up? Because it's, as we mentioned, there's always different readers, especially for social impact reports. They might just jump straight to the end part of like, okay, this is amazing, they've helped to beat loneliness. But how can we really prove that the PR coverage related to those end results? Is it possible, Kristian?
Well, let's try to answer that, Stella. So, as said, this report that Dan's pulled together is really being used to do some great things and show the impact. But the interesting thing, of course, for a lot of us PRs out there is, what's the connection then, and how do we show that we are actually the ones helping drive those results? So if we go back to a second around these goals that charities have, if we really top level, say, then the goal of any charity or nonprofit to an extent is to have some sort of positive impact for their beneficiaries, whether that is a group of people or whether it is the environment. Whatever the cause is, you're trying to have a positive impact. And linked to that, as Stella went through, there are kind of common objectives that then help you to actually achieve that goal. If you are trying to achieve something, and as a nonprofit, you need donations of funding of some kind. You need people and volunteers and skilled staff in certain areas. You need partners potentially to help with things like technology or implementing or just helping with an event and hosting it. So these are some of the things that you need to sometimes achieve, or can be common examples to achieve that positive impact. So when we think about those things, then it kind of also becomes a question of how do we map those objectives and the things that we're trying to achieve to the journey of our audiences and the people that we're trying to engage, whether that is a potential fundraiser or a potential volunteer or just a potential donor? Yes, donor. So when we look at user journeys, then this is kind of as simple as it gets, isn't it? Someone hears about your cause, they say, wow, that's an amazing cause, I really want to support that. They Google and visit your website, and then they go and they make a donation. Boom, done. It was as simple as that. The reality, unfortunately, is usually that it's a few more steps around it. There's a lot more touch points. Someone will hear about your cause. Maybe they'll then visit your website. Then they'll maybe sign up for a mailing list of some kind, or some sort of contact form. Then maybe they'll attend an event or a fundraiser. And that's when they'll perhaps make a donation. Again, this is just one example. If our objective in this instance is to make a donation, these are some examples of the journey that someone can go through in trying to make a donation, or before they actually make a donation to support your cause. But then what's really interesting, or the thing that we do a lot of the time and we need to spend our work doing with PR and other communications channels and touch points, is to actually look at what's happening in between. How do we get people to to go on these journeys, to actually push them further down our quote unquote funnel? So how did someone actually hear about your cause in the first place? Well, maybe it was word of mouth, maybe it's banner adverts or some sort of advertisements that you have going somewhere. Maybe you've got a great TikTok that went viral, and hashtag Ice Bucket Challenge for that one. Oh God, that's a dated reference by now. But anyway, maybe they read an article in the news about your charity and thought that was a great cause. And then afterwards, maybe they then clicked on that ad that they saw. Maybe they clicked on that TikTok or your TikTok channel and then clicked on the link in your bio. Maybe they clicked the link in the actual article, or maybe they just Googled the name after they saw some sort of advertisement or article about it, and then they found your website. And then, of course, when they're actually on your website, when they're hearing about your cause, they need to be convinced again about your cause. They need to be moved by it. They need to be impressed by your impact. They need to be convinced of your credibility, that this is something worth giving to, not just as a cause, but also the actual organization and the way that you're structured and run. And I think this is something as well that I think Dan and Dad Lasso team are doing really well, is they're also using their PR to kind of build that credibility with banners on the website saying that they have coverage in these big hitting publications like The Guardian, and it gives that extra credibility to it. And equally, similarly, this is how they're using the CoverageBook report that we've just seen, that social impact report, is actually being used by them to prove that impact and to convince of that credibility of what they're doing. So at this stage, someone signs up for your mailing list. And then again, there's another step in that journey and those touch points, whether that is clicking on something in the newsletter that you send, maybe you use the email to actually retarget them on social with an event promotion, however it is that you then get them to it. And then at the event, ask to donate, visit the website maybe the day after, maybe send a follow-up email after the event to say thank you for joining. If you could donate, here's a link, etc. And then hopefully they also then spread the word so that we have a little helpful cycle that takes us back to this word of mouth idea. Again, this is one example for how someone could end up making a donation. And what then we get the PR elements. Well, the question is then still, what is the role of PR in all this? Well, if we look at all those touch points that we went through in this one example, there are multiple times where owned and earned channels are really playing a key role in this, whether that's your social content team putting together that TikTok, or your PR team landing some earned media coverage, whether it's the websites or the social profiles and the articles and the backlink, or maybe it's your SEO ranking. All these touch points are places where PR could potentially be helping, and your owned and earned content could potentially be helping people along that journey, amplifying your story. So don't go straight necessarily from PR article to £10,000 donation, click on the website. We need to kind of understand that full journey and account for it, and be able to track that entire journey to be able to measure that impact. So again, if we're looking at this one example of where we're looking at the charity objective of donations and funding, then what do the PR objectives actually become attached to that? Well, the PR objectives and mapping that journey, it is things like driving awareness, increasing audience engagement when they actually visit your website. It's building credibility when they're on your website or they see other pieces of content from you and they see other earned media perhaps. It's growing the community, whether that's a mailing list, whether it's social media following. It's increasing events attendance, whether that's, again, promoting something through a newsletter or other mailing list. And it's increasing that engagement at the actual events. All these can be potential PR objectives linked to just one of your overall charity objectives. So here, how do we actually make this a bit more practical? Because these are still broad objectives, aren't they? Drive awareness for the sake of it. And how do we measure that? Well, the way that we actually want to measure things then is we've got that journey. We now understand all the points at which PR is making a contribution to this full journey that happens before we actually get to a donation. So what we want to do is actually map those objectives of our PR to specific metrics. And here are some examples. I mean, driving awareness, you can talk about the number of articles, which is our standard. I hope that everyone has done that at some points in their PR reports. I'm not sure you can ever get around it. Actual article reach, or at least estimated article reach, which is something where CoverageBook is really helpful, rather than throwing out the big numbers of we reach 7 billion people because that's how many people have clicked on yahoo.com in the past half a year. Then looking at the actual engagements and the actual estimated actual views on a news article. Social amplification, how often did this get shared and reshared on social? Looking at audience engagement as well, then how did we increase backlinks for people to click through? Did we see a rise potentially in searches for the charity brand? Did we increase our SEO ranking because we got coverage in titles that have high domain authority? And did we increase our website traffic as well? Can we actually see that link between we get a piece of coverage and we then pull it through? So these are some examples for how we can map the specific parts of PR, the objectives of PR, to a specific metric that we can then measure and align with that user journey. So what does it look like in practice? And we'll keep saying Dan's praises, and he may be surprised at seeing this as well as an attendee. It'll be the first time he's seeing this analysis and spin on their own internal data. So thank you again very much for being up for sharing that with us so that we could make this real instead of just talking about theoretical proof points.
Which is a big thing in it for us in PR measurement, isn't it? And Kristian and I are part of a few PR measurement events and things, and often it's just theory. So we wanted to make this as practical as possible. So yeah, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kristian. Go on.
Cheers. So this is straight from the website, so hopefully Dan doesn't disagree. But the goal of Dad La Soul is we battle the social isolation and loneliness felt by millions of dads across the UK every day. And the way that it does it is by building communities. They partner with social housing providers, social prescription networks, local authorities, and brands. And they, quote, produce kick-ass dad-friendly playdates, contents, and training workshops. And they start conversations that really matter. So these are great goals again. And then the question is, how do we map that to the PR? How does PR play a role in supporting all of these important objectives so that we can achieve our ultimate goal and have that social impact? And some of the things that we've come up with is building awareness, increasing that audience engagement, well-being at events, growing volunteer networks, and partner connection and community growth. Unfortunately, we won't be able to go through how to measure each and every single one of those individually, but let's start looking at some of those journeys. When we did a user journey before in the theoretical, how can the user journey look like for someone who's trying to engage with Dad La Soul, and particularly attending those events, those kick-ass dad-friendly playdates? That's what we're going to focus on. So a potential journey for a dad who's part of this community or interested in joining the Dad La Soul community is he could hear about it from word of mouth. When I spoke to Dan, there were several examples of that, a particular partner who was suggesting it, or it could be me seeing the media article directly, some sort of news article. They'll then, through organic search, reach the website or direct or referral traffic, or they'll click on things on social media. On the website, they can read more about the cause, they can read more about why this is an important issue, and they can read also how Dad La Soul is addressing it, and they can also see the credibility of it through things like, as mentioned before, the banners that show the many places like the BBC, Guardian, and HuffPost that Dan and the team have been able to get coverage with. They can then sign up to join and be part of that community and get notified and get emails, or maybe they'll see a social promotion or they'll see an email promotion, and they can then sign up on Eventbrite to actually attend one of these quote unquote kick-ass dad-friendly playdates. I'm just using this as an excuse, by the way, to swear a couple of times, but they're not my swear words. And that's actually how we then get, by attending those kick-ass dad-friendly playdates, that's how we get to that end goal and that actual impact, human impact on people of feeling less lonely. So how can we show that PR is part of that journey in practice? Well, the specific PR metrics that I came up with for Dad La Soul remind a little bit of the ones that we saw before. Things I'd like to focus on this part is particularly, number of articles, the actual article reach, website traffic, and event signups. And let's see how we can kind of play around with some of the data that Anne was generous enough to share with us. So the first is PR impact on traffic to the website. And this is real data indeed from it. And just one caveat to note that the time periods that you're going to see on this slide and the next slide are slightly different because, well, some of the events that we took the information from was pre-COVID that we wanted to look at, the event attendance figures. And this is, well, you can see the dates that are spanning from January 21st to May earlier this year. And kind of, if you're not as into graphs as I am, what I think is really interesting when you see this flow is you have a period of time where there's not any coverage for 4 months, and you have these website visits are kind of stagnating. And you then have coverage that starts to hit here around May 2021, and you instantly see a spike. And this is the number you're looking at here. The red line is the number of articles, and the green bars are the number of website visitors. So we see that direct correlation that when we see coverage going up and the amounts of coverage hits that you're growing, we actually see those website visits increasing. And you see that those spikes being driven throughout. And when you see that period, there's actually a lingering effect as well. When you have regular coverage, that effect of it pulls through in the month after and afterwards as well over a longer period of time, and it sustains that website visit number in that time.
It seems like such a simple metric, number of articles, number of pieces of coverage, but it's so important, isn't it? It's so simple, but so important to track that over time. Of course, other metrics too, which I know you're going to go through, but yeah, if you're not logging your coverage and all of the metrics in one place, please do. Sorry to plug, but in CoverageBook there is like an area called the Vault, which has all coverage that you ever add. So it's like a really good sort of tracker. Yeah, and it does sort of have, you can sort of refine down by time, and then has all of the metrics in there as well. But even if you're not using that, try and to have your own tracker. I mean, Google Sheets, Excel, something, because that's step number one, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I think, yeah, the real power here is actually when you start looking at not just your number of coverage hits, but you start combining that with other pieces of data that you can pull in. I should say as well, in terms of the tools that we use to create this, it's actually can be done for free as long as you're tracking your coverage. The tool used was Google Analytics. We got access to that. And then if you are looking to track coverage, you can use a media monitoring tool, whether that is, personally, our agency uses Signal AI, but Cision, Meltwater, all of those would do it as well. And I also mentioned here Propel PR as another potential tool that you can use, not just for tracking, but they actually integrate your Google Analytics and coverage to save you time in doing charts like this. But I think the kind of, go ahead.
I was just going to say with analytics, it's super important. If anybody doesn't have access to analytics, take that as like a step one sort of thing to do after this webinar. If you can't gain the access, go and make friends with the people who do have access at your charity or non-profit, because it's just so important. There's not much that you can sort of really find out without this, really. So just go and make friends. There's this part of it as well. It's just one tiny area from analytics, and the people who normally manage it are not even sort of looking at this part that much. So, and also like with looking at referral traffic from coverage as well is quite cool. It's never as big as you think it's going to be, by the way. But it's good over time. That's the point. So yeah, do get that.
No, I mean, to that point, when you're really digging into it, and especially when you have teams which are rightfully trying to do the correct attribution on things like Google Analytics, I think it's worth as well thinking not just the referral traffic that comes directly from a link. That's, of course, is the gold standard of attribution within Google Analytics, is if we have a backlink in the article and someone clicks on it. But as we know, not every publication puts in backlinks. Not everything allows for it. Not every person who reads the article will click on the link right then and there. So what's also worth looking at is not limit yourself to just referral traffic, but also start looking at and making a system for attribution to organic searches. So if you have an uplift in branded search or searches around campaign specific terms, if you've run a big campaign, then looking for those organic searches and attributing any particular spikes within organic search to your PR coverage as well, and finding ways to agree with your stakeholders how to actually make that attribution and what seems like the right division of attribution for the things that you can't account for, because it's not just all billboards that are driving organic search of a brand, right? It is very likely that it is the PR. So when you're in that Google Analytics, be nuanced with which traffic sources that you're looking at, but also be sure to not sell yourself too short, because if you don't take a bit of credit for some of that organic search traffic increases, someone else will, and they'll take the budget with it.
Very good point. I think that answers Gemma's question that came through on the question tab, actually, about how can we sort of separate the traffic from PR, what's PR coverage, how can we attribute it to PR? And it's going to make a difference as to the size of the organization you're working with and what other activity they have going on, as Kristian just said. But find out what else they have going on. And if it is a really big organization with advertising, with paid and earned social and other organizations and marketing involved, then you want to start to look at the referral traffic. But yeah, as Kristian said, if it doesn't have as much activity like that, you can take that it is coming from you. If you want to go a level deeper, something else that we used to do was to look at increased searches as well, to try and add another layer. If people did really question, well, how do you know that it was people that had seen the coverage and then came to the site? Because if there isn't a link and you can't see the traffic there, something we used to do is look at the searches for something that's related to the coverage or something related to the campaign. There's another little added tip there, but it has to be quite big searches.
Yeah, I think that's also quite relevant when particularly talking about campaigns. Then sometimes they're not actually looking for necessarily to go and visit your website. They're looking to find the news story about your campaign. I think I won't go any more into it here, but there is a report that Stella and I both helped write around share search, and there's some points around generally keyword tracking and brand search tracking. And
I'll add the link to the chat just in case people are interested in that. Whole other different way of measuring an insight, but interesting if you want to dig into that.
Absolutely. So this slide is obviously how do we prove the PR impact on traffic, and we managed to pull out an average blockbuster stat of almost 2 times as much traffic on average if there's been coverage in the same or the previous month. So that's both tracking this period beforehand, but also one of the months afterwards in that period where there had been no coverage in the month before or the month during. So it does have a sustained impact. And then obviously for Dadler, attendance at their events and these kick-ass play dates is really, really super important. So what's really interesting about this data, so what you're looking at here on the chart is we've combined, again, coverage, but we're not looking at specifically the coverage number. What we're now looking at here with the red line is actually the estimated actual views of an article. So that's the CoverageBook metric of estimating how many people actually clicked on and read that article versus what's the entire reach of the publication. We kind of track that along with how many people got tickets for the various events through Eventbrite, which is where they registered it. And again, just note, this is the period that we're looking at here is right there pre-COVID. And what's interesting actually is kind of seeing how it ends this virtual or virtuous cycle of coverage begetting event attendance, which begets more coverage in turn. So that first spike in high reaching articles or articles that have a lot of shareability is actually coverage that was secured because of a successful event at first. And then we see the reversal happening where a big spike in coverage in November helps support activity in December and tickets that are then sold or that are then registered in Eventbrite during that time. And that's the largest spike. The largest spike that we have an estimated reach of the coverage secured also corresponds then with the largest event sign up with the next month.
Love that. As Kristian said, estimated reach is it's a metric that's in CoverageBook. So we estimate how many views the actual article has had, and we do it with social coverage as well. Formula that looks at the engagement and the size of the site and where it was on the site. So this is really, really cool to see it used in this way.
And obviously, because I am having fun with this webinar jam platform, I've also been running a poll on whether you use non-traditional PR metrics and data in your PR impact reporting. And I'm very happy to see that but almost half of you are using at least several, 11% of you are using several, a few, almost 20%, and none, 23%. So hopefully we've inspired some of you in the 23% and hopefully also to maybe add some new ones to what you're already doing.
On that, actually, no, you carry on and we'll go to questions at the end.
Perfect. And then what I'd also like to point out here is just quickly, this is the actual event feedback. So once you have people actually attend these events, this is the impact that Dan and the team are having with these sessions. And yeah, you can see it there on a scale from 1 to 5, 4.8 strongly agreed that they feel less socially isolated after attending. They feel less lonely, 4.1. And 4.5 for I'm happy to have a safe space to talk to people that can relate. I think that's really awesome. This is where we're trying to go. That's the actual impact of doing good in the world. And I think that's kind of my cheesy quote for the day, is that the role of PR in charity and measurement, it's not that PR is going to save the world, but it helps you do it.
It does. Great work from Dan. And great work from Kristian in pulling together that data. So yeah, I don't know if that was just a recap on that. Dan, who is the founder at Dad Le Soul, amazing organization who we've just been talking about, uses CoverageBook to pull together his social impact report. But then Kristian was then worked with Dan to gain all of the data to build that almost like user journey, PR impact journey there for us to really see and prove that PR did lead to that amazing stats at the end. So thank you so much, Kristian, for showing us that live example. Hopefully that does resonate with some of the work that you guys are doing who have attended today. I think the point is that it's not, there's no silver bullet in PR measurement, is there? It can never just be exactly lifted. But I think the journey that you showed us at the beginning and the different touch points is a really good place to start, because you can start to fill in the gaps of the activity that you guys are doing there. And I did mention that we will share the slides as well as the recording. So I think it would be hopefully a really good help for you all.
Yeah. And then to wrap up really quickly before we go to any more questions, just some quick learnings. I think it's important when you start this journey, or not start it, but when you're improving and thinking about this journey, is to map out those touch points and then understand where PR can help. Once you've agreed that journey with your stakeholders, it's a lot easier to convince them and show them how PR is impacting it if they understand that full journey. The other thing is to start collecting data now. Figure out, once you've got your touch points, collect that data and do it consistently. being aware of new tools, yes, always try to add and be on the front foot of it, but be careful with data switching, and also be sure to account for any changes that actually happen in the how the data is measured. I mean, an example that's affecting all of us at the moment is that website traffic is changing with Google Analytics, with G4 in different ways. So sometimes we don't always have a choice if we can keep G3, but we do have to just be aware of and make sure that we're accounting for that change in how we're collecting that data.
Even on a PR coverage level, with checking your data points, labels of metrics which you would appear to be exactly the same between tools can actually be very different. So an example of that is like monthly visits to a site. Really look to see whether that's visits, uniques, even the way that the time capture, if it is visits, you might go from one tool where it says, oh yeah, monthly visits, that's fine. Even if I switch to this other tool, it says monthly visits, that's fine, the data's the same. It could be a different date capture that they're looking at. You know, just really, if you are, as I say, it's great to be looking around for new tools, and I know that we're mentioning some here, but don't jump ship very quickly between lots. All right, make sure that you are making, you know, the right decision, and your data won't be skewed in any way or messed up, because as you've seen, the most important thing is to track your coverage and your data over a decent period of time, so you can start to build these stories, the success stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, not everything works on the same day, right? It's unfortunately not how ideal consumers and people that we're trying to reach mechanically will exactly right then click buy, donate straight after seeing something. So you want to be able to track these things over time as well. Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered the consistent data collection and points tied to that previously. But I think it's also worth noting this idea, as you saw, sometimes the insight is in combining those pieces of data that we already have access to, layering them on top of each other to actually understand what's happening and how they're connected, if there is a connection at all.
Yeah. And I find it's interesting just to be looking at that along the way as well. Often I know that when I was in sort of doing campaigns, we'd wait till trying to find these insights at the end of the quarter or the end of the year. But it's really interesting just to be looking at this all of the time and just start use it to build back into the strategy, change direction, but also just following those journeys. On the last point of getting buy-in as well, that relates to a question just around, can't remember who it's from now, but it's people saying that it can be a challenge sometimes to get access to analytics. Have you got any tips on that, Kristian?
I've been down that journey many times. I think I literally have a bullet pointed list somewhere from an old client on how to convince them. I mean, the first thing is obviously finding out who is it that actually has access. Often that is not necessarily it's rarely in the PR team. It's often not even necessarily in the marketing team. It's quite often a developer team or someone who you can work your way around. I think it's often helpful as well to remind people that you literally can't change anything in terms of the actual website. You can change a bit on the back end of reporting and events, but you can't fuck up a website by using Google Analytics, and reminding them about that. And if you are with an organization or you are external, you should hopefully also have an NDA, so they shouldn't be worried about sharing that data. So often I find that the biggest challenge is actually finding the right person and having access to that right person. I suggest if you're struggling with that, or your direct contact is not able to quite figure that out, I suggest going around to the developer teams who tend to have the most access on a website, rather than necessarily the marketing teams or the PR comms teams, and make friends. As Stella said earlier, make friends.
Sometimes it can just be almost, especially if you're going through a PR contact and then they're going to another person, then they're going, it just gets a breakdown in communication a lot of the time. And yeah, that point that you said, Kristian, about that you can't change anything. That's the biggest I was actually just trying to find there. Gary Preston, our founder at CoverageBook, we both worked in an agency before creating CoverageBook, and this was a really big need and challenge for us, because we were a SEO and a PR team, and it was really, really important for us to have analytics access. But Gary ended up writing sort of a template letter to the developers, and I was just trying to find it. I'll try and find it for you, because it's kind of just covering those points, really, just like we only need it for this, and it's using their terminology, language that they recognize, and I think that just kind of reassures them, that they think, okay, we're not just giving this to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, they're going to mess it all up. That's the main worry. Yeah, if I find it, I'll let you know. If not, we'll try and create a new one or something.
I have a similar one that's been done before as well, or it's not as formal as a template, but I have like the email in my sent files, which I'll look again. But I mean, separate to that, I also have how to find the right person. Like, check this team, this title.
That's really good, actually. Because all organizations can be really different. A quick one from Kelly. Kristian, you mentioned a tool earlier that was connected to analytics, but also was for coverage. What was that?
That was Propel PR. So it's actually a media database, but they have the integration where they combine that, cool. Your Google Analytics with your coverage over time. I think there's a couple other that do the same as well now, but Propel PR is the one I was mentioning before. Okay,
great. I think we've covered all of the questions, and look at that, we've 1 minute to go. Any chance of a CoverageBook t-shirt? Yes. Would you like blue or white? Yeah, Alina, just message me, either at me, DM me on Twitter, or email me, stella@coveragebook.com. I'd love to send you a t-shirt. Cool. Any last questions? Send them now. If not, as mentioned, we will be lots of t-shirt requests coming through now. I love this.
You know what you need to get? You need to get these headphones branded with like a CoverageBook logo. Yeah. That would be a goodie.
I would love to see where the t-shirts go as well, with all of these places that everybody says that they live in. I'd love to see the t-shirts in different places. That's it.
I mean, I hope people know the condition of getting a t-shirt is that you obviously have to post a selfie with it and tag CoverageBook, right, on Twitter. That's the rule.
That's the payment. All right, this is cool. Yeah, so get in touch with me if you do want a t-shirt, and I'm up for sending. But in addition to t-shirts, we will be sending out an email by the end of this week with this recording, and all of the links that we've mentioned and the slides as well. So thank you all for joining, but a huge thank you to you, Kristian, for sharing your wisdom on getting through the data and telling a success story of PR in charity and non-profits. Really useful. Thank you. All right, I think that is done. Look at that timing.
I know.
Exactly on 1 hour.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, I think we've practiced. All right, guys, thank you so much. Keep a lookout for our next webinar, which will be in a month's time. Lovely to see you all. Thank you. Bye. Okay.